YPJ. So YPG is interesting to us because we have a tendency in the mainstream media, because they're presented only as a fighting force, to see them only as a fighting force. But they're much more than that. In terms of the revolution, they're truly a university for the revolution. They're truly one of the places where I think the revolution is going to gain a lot of maturity and get, put down some pretty solid roots into culture here. So let's start a little bit. So YPG was founded in 2002, 2003. Okay, so they'd been building underground and training underground for 10 years prior to them coming out of the woodwork with the fall of the Assad regime. YPJ was formed in 2012, 2013 because it was felt like women being commanded by men did not present the type of image that they wanted, so they wanted to form a separate militia. In HPG, which is the PKK militia across the road in Turkey, they have both men's and women's brigades, and men oversee men and women oversee women, but they wanted to make them two separate fighting forces here. I think it was a good idea for a lot of reasons. There are no officers in the YPG or the YPJ at all. So if there is a battle coming up, the unit will vote on an officer that they'll follow. And that vote can be anything from, this officer is originally from this area, they may know something about it that we don't, this officer may have served here before, they may know people. So in other words, they're going to choose somebody who practically is going to be a better leader in that position. When that position is done, when that battle is over, that person goes right back into the ranks again and ceases to be a leader completely. The order of battle in YPG is pretty straightforward, and for us it's interesting because they've definitely read their Spanish Civil War, and especially the issues with the anti-fascist militias. So a team is 6 to 12 fighters. 2 teams is called a suite, as in a suite of rooms, S-U-I-T-E. 2 suites are a block or a garug, and 2 blocks are a company. 4 companies or more make up a commando. So a commando is roughly, can be 400 soldiers and above, or basically your militia people and above. So if you remember your Spanish Civil War, they had only 2 units in their order of battle, which was the decade, which was 10 soldiers, and then the century, which was 100. So that was really unworkable quantity because they were fighting in small areas like this. So having these smaller teams, having these smaller groupings allows for a greater flexibility when they're designing some of the complex attacks that they've had to do with Daesh. This picture is taken right next to the Turkish border. On the other side of this yellow building, literally, is the Turkish border. So with these units, that's the one exception to the officer rule, basically, because it's recognized that if the Turks push across the border, there's going to be no chance, there'll be no time to vote for anyone, ever. So this young gentleman here, closest to me, is the team leader for this group for the next month or 2, and then he'll relinquish that position. Somebody else will be voted in for the next month or 2. YPJ were recently spanked, well, a year ago, were spanked by the UN. In Kurdish culture, the age of accountability, the age when I effectively become an adult for all intents and purposes, is 13. So YPG and YPJ recruited 13 and above. UN heard about it and they said, well, that's child soldiers, you guys can't do that. So there was negotiations and they decided on 16. So that's where that's ended up. Let's take a look at the next one. So this guy doesn't look 16, but he just got there. He's from Aleppo. 2 of his family members have been killed by Daesh. So he had walked about 170 miles across Daesh territory to be able to join the YPG. And then this is, like I said, right on the Turkish border. You can see these bullet pockmarks on the building. So that's not a battle. Basically, if it's late on a Saturday night and you're not doing much, the Turkish border guards will shoot every once in a while at the Kurds, and the Kurds will shoot back at the Turkish border guards. It's kind of one of the things that they do in Kobani on a Saturday night. Asayish, the Asayish. The Asayish are interesting for us as anarchists because they are the closest thing that we witness in Kurdish culture or in this specific revolutionary culture to a nation state. So when I went to Kobani, or when I went to Rojava, I wanted to answer a couple of questions. First, is it an anarchist society or not? In other words, is there a state there or not? And that's a pretty easy question to answer. And the way that you answer it is you look at sovereignty. And sovereignty is the concept that that one agency or organization or individual controls the monopoly of force over a piece, a territory of ground. When that happens, by definition, you have a nation state. So in other words, if you have multiple militias answering to different authorities, that type of thing, then you can't have a nation state. But if you have a single army responding to a president or a legislature or whatever, then you have a nation state. Pretty straightforward. These guys, the SAIS only answer to the cantonal authorities, okay? And since they're out on the roads and doing kind of the police work and the internal security type of stuff, it presents them with some real issues. It is possible to go to prison in Rojava, and you can only get there by doing one of three things: by committing a homicide, by committing a rape, or by committing domestic violence. Anything else gets referred to one of two places. One is called the Malagel, which is the house of the people, and the other one is the Malajin, which is the house of women. And those are specific to either the victim or the individual who was responsible for the harm that was caused. The Kurds believe in restorative justice, and restorative justice is real simple to think about. It's what was the situation prior to the harm occurring. So Andres, I steal a candy bar from Andres, and I get caught, and they bring me in to the Malagel because we're both men. And they say, oh, you stole a candy bar, you're gonna have to pay it back, or you're gonna have to work for an hour to pay him back for the money to purchase the candy bar. That's gonna be my punishment, right? So there is no jail for that. They're in the process of just restoring Andres to where he was and making sure that I'm responsible for helping to pay him back. I asked one of the SAIS guys that I met in Kobani, he's like, well, how do you justify the murder, rape, and domestic violence? And he gave me a real coherent answer. He said, look, when we talk about restorative justice, how do we restore a homicide? How do we restore a rape? And domestic violence, he really got me over the table. He said, how do we restore violence that may have occurred for decades? We can't. It's not something that we can physically do. So the best that we can do right now is do this prison thing. So that said, what does a prison census look like in Rojava? As of, August, end of September, Amnesty International did an audit of all the prisoners in Rojava. They found about 400. Of those, 290 were Daesh fighters, which the revolutionaries just don't know what to do with. They can't turn them loose. They're not going to kill them. They're not sure what to do with them. They're basically prisoners of war. So that leaves about 110 individuals who are there either waiting for their case to be, solved, or waiting for, or they're currently serving a prison sentence, which I thought was interesting. So let's take a look at another one. This is a woman, an Arab woman who is an SAIS, and she is checking on the passports of some folks. Now, one quick thing, that said, the SAIS really, they come from a revolutionary tradition, which means that each one of these folks who I'm meeting as an SAIS probably knows somebody who disappeared into a Turkish jail and died there as a result of, some type of accident or whatever. So in many ways, they hate the police as much as I do, right? Or they hate the Denver Police Department as much as everyone should, something like that. So that said, they have instituted some really unique ways to be able to show their distrust of basic police procedures. When you get arrested in Rojava, I know that nobody here's been arrested, but whenever I get arrested, they always take two pictures of me, one like this and one like this. In Rojava, they take a picture of you and it looks just like this. The next one. And the reason they do that is because they're worried about the face with an accusation below it or beside it following somebody for the rest of their lives, right? So they take a mugshot from the back of somebody's head, which when you think about it is kind of a ridiculous thing. It's like, giving this to a couple of detectives, go find this guy. It's like you'd have to follow people all day. It's like looking at the back of their heads. Crazy. All right, so this is the TS Somal Commando. And you'll see these guys are a little bit older than the other YPG fighters. This is a tactical second unit. So this is a unit that sits behind the front by about 100 or 200 yards. Most of them, as you can see, are way too old and too fat to run. So they put them like behind the line so that anybody who comes into their field of fire, they shoot at and they try to kill. So the name for these guys in Kermanji is literally a meat grinder brigade. The interesting thing about it is about half these guys are Arabs, about half these guys are Kurds. The picture shows the volleyball net. And volleyball, how to put this? As soccer is to Brazilians, as hockey is to Canadians, so volleyball is to the Kurds. It is like an uncontrollable, like a fan thing. It's like the Denver Broncos fans, live and die on the whole thing. So, and when I was in Arbil, getting to the border, I stayed in a hotel that had like 600 channels. 50 of them were like, volleyball channels, like 24-hour volleyball. And then I realized, wow, some of them are like classic volleyball, like 1952 Olympic championships. It's crazy. And then I saw this. I was like, shit. I mean, this is a group of older guys, right? So another thing that's important about this is a lot of these guys crossed over from Turkey. One of the questions that everybody gives is, wow, how did YPG, springing from the ground again, form this really effective militia force? And the answer is that these guys have either been training in Rojava or they've been fighting in Turkey for a decade or two before they ever came into Rojava. So they didn't, it's not the type of thing that was, introduced piecemeal. It wasn't some type of miraculous thing. I mean, this is a group of kind of hardened guys. This guy I'm standing next to, this bald guy with a scarf on, is the commander of this commando, and he was a pretty tough character. He started with PKK in 87, 88 as just a mountain gorilla, and then finally this gentleman who had the incredibly healthy breakfast standing next to me said, "I want you to take a picture of my Kalashnikov," and I said, "Sure, I'd be happy to." So pulled me over to the side and showed me his Kalashnikov, and I said, "Oh, you have a bullet that you've welded to the barrel of your Kalashnikov?" And he said, "Yeah." I said, "What's it for?" And he said, "It reminds me always, if I'm captured, to keep one bullet, just one bullet," right, for him. So I've been back for 6 months. Some of this stuff is still pretty emotional, and I'm still pretty raw with it. This is one of those times, so I want to apologize, but I'll let you know that it's kind of hard to get through. So June 25th, 2015, 100 Daesh fighters disguised as SAS and YPG fighters snuck into Rojava, ignited three car bombs in the center of downtown, and then went around door to door, middle of the night. And anybody who came to the door, they brought out and slaughtered. And this cemetery is on the north side of Kobani. We'd stopped there. The driver that I was with that day had lost 2 uncles, and he wanted to stop and clean their graves. And I said, "Sure, we can stop." So we stopped. I really wanted to get a feel for the victims of this massacre. Who would you possibly drag out of bed in the middle of the night and slaughter, murder? So finally it happened. Most of the graves were in Arabic, and it's Kurmanjicized Arabic, so it's Arabic being used phonetically to spell out Kurdish words. And I finally came upon this one. So this little girl's name is Hemginagiri, and she was born October 5th, 2014, and was killed June 25th, 2015. So that's a 9-month-old girl. As a result of this, it was recognized that maybe more units might be needed in terms of militia. And as a result of that, we can go to the next one. HPC was formed. HPC, the Hezb Palestinian Juwari, literally means the Self-Defense Forces. And the idea for this, TEVDEM, which it kind of is, TEVDEM is a non-governmental organization whose sole charge is to implement democratic and federalism. TEVDEM had been talking about having people do policing of their own streets for a while, but had not really operationalized, had not come up with plans to be able to put that into play. So a couple of communes in Kamishlo had already formed their own militia, and they approached the Jazeera Canton legislature and said, "Look, we got these militias. What we want you guys to do is to train them, to arm them, to give them uniforms, and and to give them something to do. But here's the deal. They are responsible solely to the communes. They will never be responsible to cantons. They'll never be responsible to TEVDEM, YPG, YPJ, no one. They're solely responsible to communes." Now, for you guys who remember your history, it's traditionally, we get our asses kicked almost inevitably in the same place, where when everybody's out of the front, counter-revolution happens at home, and there's nobody there to protect the home front, right? This militia, one of the partial reasons for this militia is to protect against exactly that type of counter-revolution. The entire idea is to have a group of individuals responsible to the communes who can be there in case something happens such that they're going to be needed to protect the revolution in the event that all all other forces are not available. In addition, in the situation like the massacre in Kobani, it's hoped that this militia would prove to be effective in terms of slowing down the movement of these, the Daesh killers through these apartment buildings and these houses, killing families, that type of thing. So, gives a feel for HPC. And then you can see these are some HPC folks right here. The woman over on the far side from me is, she's a Sash, you can tell by her uniform. But these folks are, just normal looking folks. Like this lady here looks a bit like an aunt of mine, maybe a grandmother with a Kalashnikov, right? Somebody I definitely listen to. Good. So the big question is Rojava an anarchist society? So taking sovereignty is our key. I mean, we can define the state however we want, but I chose to define it in the way that Western liberal democracies do, because it was the easiest, it's the most accepted. So the question ultimately is there, are all militias responsible to one authority or to separate authorities? And the answer is they're responsible to separate authorities. YPG respond to internal commands. They don't respond to any of the